What are you looking forward to in 2026 in terms of trends for public transportation? What have you learned in 2025? Those of you who are regular listeners to our podcast know that we've published 52 episodes this year, one for every week, and we talk to a different transit executive or leader every Wednesday. Today we talk to David Zipper, and we take a look back at 2025 from his view and a look forward into 2026 as a futurist on our year-end episode. David is a senior fellow at the MIT Mobility Initiative and considered one of the leading voices in the transit world. And he's written over 200 articles in publications like The Atlantic, Bloomberg, and Vox on transportation, technology, and society. And today we dive into all things transit. We explore his opinion on hot topics like zero-emission buses, congestion charging, what's coming out of Washington, what about some of the trends this year when it comes to ridership, when it comes to mobility as a service, microtransit, driverless trains, all of that we dig into. We take his opinion on all these topics, which he has spent a lot of time thinking about this and writes, and just got back from a European lecture tour on topics related to transportation and smart cities. It's going to be a great episode. It is a great episode. And we've had a great year in 2025. Those of you who are regular listeners, we appreciate you. We thank you for being part of our Transit Unplugged family. This is our 8th year now, and we continue to grow. Our Apple and Spotify listeners, which are our two biggest platforms, have gone up on average about 22%. We have a newsletter, and subscribers are up on that as well. We encourage you to subscribe to the Transit Unplugged newsletter as well. It gives you a take on what's happening, all things Transit Unplugged. As you know, the podcast is where it all started. Now we've expanded to live events. We do live CEO roundtables and events. We're hoping to do a number of them in the new year. We also had the TV show now in our 4th season. The current episode is from Italy, and that has just taken off on YouTube. The last 3 episodes have all crossed 600,000 views on YouTube from viewers across the world, plus we're on 23 cable channels across America and a number of digital streaming platforms, including the Transportation Channel. We've had a great year of 2025, and we look forward to an even better 26. And what a great conversation today with David Zipper, who talks about all these things and trends into the new year. Enjoy the conversation. Great to be with David Zipper, a friend of mine for many years. David, you've had some amazing positions that we'll eventually get to and talk about. But first off, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is our end of year kind of look back and our look forward, putting on your futurist hat. Are you ready to kind of give us your overall take on things?
As ready as I'll ever be. Let's make it happen. I'm glad to
right.
be here. Yeah.
Well, in the green room, you were mentioning that you've been doing some speaking in Europe on what I think are some fascinating topics. Why don't we start with them and just tell us the general ideas behind robo-taxis and this theory of abundance, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, sure. So I spent a couple weeks in Europe I guess it was in November, giving a couple keynotes in Lisbon and at Barcelona at the Smart City World Expo, some folks might know about, where I was sort of sharing lessons and observations about robotaxis in the US. The US is, along with China, really like a global leader in these sort of like self-driven cars. And I've written about the experiences of places like San Francisco and Phoenix that have had them for a while. I actually presented to APTA, the Transit Association, about it as well, because I am skeptical that this is a trend that is going to be very good for cities' transportation networks and good for transit. So I was offering some warnings, frankly, to Europe because they don't really have robotaxis yet. They're poised to get them next year in London and Denmark and a couple other places, but I was sort of offering some suggestions based on the American experience of maybe what to be careful about.
That's interesting. And can you give us a couple things we should be careful about?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote a long story in Vox about this. If people want to try to find that, it comes right up if you Google it. But what I worry about are really a couple things. And it's really about robotaxis at scale. Having 100 or 200 robotaxis in your city is fun and exciting. And if they mess up stuff, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's futuristic. But the whole purpose of robotaxis and why they're attracting billions of dollars in investment is not because they want to have 200 robotaxis in each city. They want to have tens of thousands, if not even into the hundreds of thousands. And it's a different ballgame then. For one thing, robotaxis have a bad habit in San Francisco, which is a multimodal dense city, of blocking transit, of blocking bus stations, of operating in bus lanes, of getting in the way of crosswalks. And if you scale that dramatically, you're talking about a lot of roadway chaos that could be problematic for anybody who's not in one of these vehicles. But the other thing that I really worry about is congestion, because robo-taxis in California are empty, what's known as deadheading half the time, as that's Waymos in particular, when they're en route to pick somebody up or just driving around waiting or going somewhere else without anybody inside them. That's a lot of additional miles traveled. But also, if you're inside a robotaxi, it's very pleasant. It's private. You can choose your music that you like, and it's very nice. And when we like an experience, we do more of it. So I think there's a high likelihood that people are going to take a lot more car trips if and when robotaxis become widely available. A lot more car trips means a lot more congestion, and that would be bad for transit and bad for cities. So those are some of the warnings that I see coming. And I wrote that Vox story and I spoke in Europe trying to offer not just some warnings, but some suggestions on what to do about it.
What about this concept? I remember a while ago, the Tesla idea that, hey, your car is parked most of the time at night. You could turn your car on, so to speak, on auto, and it could become part of this fleet of robo taxis for you and make money for you at night. Is that happening, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not happening now. And so here's my first, this is something that Elon Musk has talked about. Your Tesla is going to make you money while you sleep. And my question to you, Paul, is how often do you want a taxi ride at 3 a.m. while everybody else is sleeping?
Not
Unless
too
you have a
often.
different lifestyle than what I think you do, it's probably not very much.
No, I always say nothing good can happen after 2 a.m. It seems like every time somebody gets hurt in the news, it's at 2 a.m. he was found on the side of the road.
Yeah. So on a serious point, that's actually why this whole idea of, your robo-taxi or personally owned robo-taxi bringing you to work at 9 a.m. and picking you up at 5 and then just making a lot of money the rest of the time doesn't really work, because humans tend to want to travel at the same times. So there's not a lot of excess slack in the system. And I don't think that vision is going to come to fruition.
Interesting. Okay, now talk about abundance, David. What's this all about? Abundance sounds good.
Yeah, who doesn't want more of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Abundance good, scarcity bad. No, this is an idea that has sort of like caught the attention of a lot of people, I would say, in the center left, a lot of people in Silicon Valley. And the central premise, which has been sort of articulated by a couple of journalists, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, who wrote a book called Abundance that came out at the beginning of this year, is to basically say the stuff that we really want in society, like clean energy and healthcare and transportation and housing, we need to not just provide more money to subsidize it. We need to make it cheaper to provide it. We need to address supply side constraints on it. And of course, supply side issues have been a focus of Republicans, not Democrats and people on the left. But abundance basically says we need to find ways of building more stuff that we need more cheaply. So it's an exciting idea, especially with housing being so expensive on the coasts. It gets a lot
In
of it like, how do we
Canada.
build more? Yeah, how do we build more in New York and California and stuff like that? So it's caught a lot of attention. And I wrote a whole series of stories in Bloomberg this year asking what abundance might mean for transportation. And I wrote it, frankly, initially out of fear, because I was worried that if we're not careful, abundant transportation might just mean more highways and more cars. And that's not a good thing. So I wrote an essay about that in Bloomberg, and then I focused on a few specific examples of what it could mean, one of which is specific to transit, based on some research by Ed Glazer, you might know as an urban economist at Harvard, and Sam Silverberg, who ran infrastructure in the Biden White House. They did a Brookings report pointing out that new buses, transit buses, are incredibly expensive in the US, like twice as much as overseas, and suggesting some ways to address that. And one of the root problems that they identified, which I think is very consistent with the abundance frameworks, is that transit agencies customize everything when they
Yeah.
buy buses.
Yeah.
So there's no economies of scale. I thought that was a really interesting point, and I'm trying to continue to offer concrete examples of how we can channel this sort of nebulous concept of abundance to really provide value and improve things for how we travel.
Yeah, that's good. Tell us about your background a little bit.
My background is kind of idiosyncratic. I actually have a local government background working in the Bloomberg administration and then overseeing economic development strategy in Washington, D.C., where I live still. For 2 mayors, I did that at a time when bike share emerged and when Metro was going through some real challenges and ride hail first showed up in DC. And it was actually from there I went into the private sector doing venture capital, focusing on smart cities and transportation. And for the last 6 years or 7 years, I've been kind of doing my own thing. Do a lot of writing. I'm a contributing writer focused on transportation in Vox and in Bloomberg City Lab. And I do some advisory projects around regulations and transportation and strategy. And I have a foothold in academia, finally, as a senior fellow at the MIT Mobility Initiative, which is really like a front door for everything transportation related across MIT.
I love that, Dave. What a great niche. It's more than a niche, but whatever, a large
It's been
valley for you
fun,
to
yeah.
operate in. Yeah, that's great, man.
Yeah, I don't really have a full-time job. I sort of do the stuff that I believe in and feels like is constructive. And my mother has no idea how I make a living, but that's okay because I'd like to think it's helpful in doing the work that I do.
That's great, man. Yeah. Leslie, who was the head of SEPTA and former Secretary of Transportation, Leslie Richards, and I were talking a couple weeks ago. We want to do some kind of joint thing next year to talk about post CEO life, the same kind of
Yeah,
thing you're doing. How, like she's going into academia full time at Penn
yeah,
State. I'm doing a little bit with Villanova, plus the podcast and TV show and helping Medexo kind of connect. And so, yeah, it's an interesting world, which is why I asked you to do this because you're not up in your neck in alligators like a lot of CEOs are running their transit systems. You can use your right side of your brain a lot and be creative and all that. And so that's what I'm going to ask you to do today for the rest of the show. Let's
sure.
cast a look backwards to 2025.
Okay.
What do you consider some of the most consequential shifts in public transit, whether it's policy, technology, rider behavior? Why did it matter more than others?
Ooh, that's a big question. We got a lot that happened this year. I worry that we're expanding the mandate of transit in that kind of a way from the right. But I got to be honest with you, Paul. I also worry this year that we're expanding the mandate of transit from the left as well, where you see people pushing transit to electrify buses, even though it's very complicated to do so
Yeah,
operationally.
yeah.
And you also see people like Zoran Mamdani, the incoming mayor of New York City, call for eliminating transit fares to basically solve equity challenges, which are real in society. But that would come with dramatic fiscal challenges for the MTA. And so I guess I worry that this year we saw both actors on the right and on the left saddle transit with expectations that are not fair and are not appropriate and that can get in the way of doing what we need transit to do, which is to move as many people as possible as effectively and usefully as possible. That's what I would say is the trend that I spent a lot of time thinking about and that frankly concerns me, even going into 2026. I think it's very important that those who want to ensure American Transit's future try to keep the focus on the ways in which transit provides fast, frequent, reliable, useful service for a lot of people across our cities. That is how you maintain and build coalitions of support, which, by the way, is extremely important right now because, as you well know, Paul, many agencies are facing a big fiscal deficit that requires state and regional governments to provide further financial support. And if transit is seen as being unsafe, or if it's seen as basically being a service for poor people, which I think is a risk of pushing fare free too far, I don't think you're going to get median voters to support further subsidies. So I really I hope in 2026 we see a full throated sort of like call to arms to say, let's double down on transit being a way to provide a useful mobility service within cities and try to push aside efforts to complicate its mission and expand it in ways that I don't think are viable.
Let's talk about ridership for a minute. I've done a lot of shows about ridership this year, and
Sure.
does it really matter as our number one KPI? Do you think 2025 confirmed a new permanent new normal for ridership patterns? Are agencies still in flux? And what do you think we should expect in 26?
Yeah, I spoke earlier this year. I did a story interviewing Patricia Mokhtarian, who is a professor at Georgia Tech, who is really one of the nation's leaders on commuting behavior and working from home. And what basically came from that conversation, and nothing this year has made me think otherwise from what she said, is that we're sort of stabilizing towards a relatively new normal where we're, for the foreseeable future, going to have far more people working from home than before COVID. I don't see that changing. But we also are going to see a lot of people traveling over the weekends or from their home during the week in a way that they might not have in the past. So I think that there is a new normal in the sense that weekday commute level trips are going to decline, particularly or be lower, particularly on Mondays and Fridays. So that's really bad news for like commuter rail or commuter bus services. It's just the way it is. But I mean, you can see this when you look across the country, places like SFMTA in San Francisco, you can absolutely hit new ridership records on the weekends and on routes that don't go downtown. So there needs to be a reallocation of resources and attention away from the commute and towards other kinds of trips, which probably needed to happen anyway, Paul.
Yeah.
But I do feel like we're in a new normal kind of situation now. And I think wise transit CEOs will adjust service accordingly.
Thanks for listening to the Transit Unplugged podcast. We are so glad you're here. If you're enjoying this show, we know you'll love our other transit industry programs. On Transit Unplugged TV, Paul Comfort explores the food, culture, and transit systems around the globe. You get to see everything. You'll love this show. And every week, we also offer up the Transit Unplugged News Minute, where you can get the latest industry headlines in less than 60 seconds. You can find out more at transitunplugged.com. Now back to Paul Comfort for this edition of the award-winning Transit Unplugged podcast.
And let's look at 2026. One of the big things on the horizon for a dozen big cities is the FIFA World Cup. And a lot of transit agencies are ramping up and adjusting service to get ready for it. It really is a chance for people that don't ride transit normally to try it. What do you think?
Sure, absolutely. I think that can make a lot of sense. When you have a special event like that, concerts can do this as well. I spoke with Kevin Quinn, who's the head of TransLink, about how he was so proud that he was able to serve 45,000 people a day for like a week when Taylor Swift ended her Eras tour in Vancouver. And I think that can be really useful. The other really smart strategy, I think, to introduce people to transit and build future riders is to develop collaborations with schools and universities. That's something that SEPTA has done in the last couple of years, building basic programs with schools like Swarthmore College, my alma mater, a little bit of a shout out there, where every student gets an unlimited pass all year. It's part of your student ID card. And I think that's great because there's some studies already that show that early experiences with transit, when you're a teenager, your early 20s, sort of positions you to be more likely to take transit later in life. So I would love to see more agencies develop collaborations with schools, with colleges and universities, because I think that can have a long-term payout.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jay Fox, the CEO of Utah Transit Authority, just said the exact same thing a couple of weeks ago on this podcast. They're trying to do the same thing, make sure they're expanded fully to the university base, et cetera. What other lessons would you say have come out of 2025 for transit agencies that we could utilize at other agencies? Have you come up with any kind of successfully growing transit lessons?
Well, there's a couple trends that I'm intrigued by, I'll say, and I think will probably continue into the future. One is the technology. I sometimes think that a lot of technologies are overblown in their impact and their potential upside. But there is one use of AI that I just love. And that is the use of smart cameras that are mounted on buses to ticket cars automatically that are blocking a bus station or in a bus lane. You know about this? Like Hayden AI is one of the companies.
Yeah. One of our companies is working on that. One of the Modaxo companies has that.
Is that right? Cool.
Yeah.
I think it was really rolled out at scale for the first time in New York at the MTA a few years ago. I think I wrote the first mainstream story about the technology. And it really works. One of the most exciting, at least early anecdotal pieces of evidence, I'd love to see more studies about it, was that 2/3 of the drivers who get a ticket in the mail don't get a second one. They change their behavior. And that's what you want.
Interesting.
It's not meant to be a penalty. It's meant to be an inducement to stay the heck out of the bus lane. And of course, that leads to bus service going faster, being more reliable, being higher quality. So I've been excited to see more and more states enable their transit agencies and their cities to use these sorts of cameras I think DC does it now. Oakland does it. LA does it. I know there's discussion of in Maryland of doing it where you live, Paul.
Yeah.
So I think it's great. The other trend, which I'm curious about, and I'm just starting to learn. So frankly, if there's listeners who know more than I do, let me know. But I believe it was this year that Honolulu launched its autonomous metro line, right? Do I have that right? Do you know?
Yeah. The raised metro.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, I think that's the first autonomous
Yes.
transit line in the country, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. We went out there a couple of years ago and filmed it when they were building it. And yeah, Lori is the head of it. She works with Roger, who runs the Oahu transit service there. So it's pretty exciting.
I think it is too. And I don't know if you saw that Randy Clark and WMATA just put out in their sort of strategic proposal plan a couple of weeks ago, envisioning the potential of autonomous metro
Oh, wow.
train. And I sense the beginnings of a discussion here. Vancouver obviously already has autonomous trains, which seems
Yeah.
like it provided higher quality service with lower headways. They're in Paris, they're in London. I am very intrigued by the potential of autonomous train service, although I know unions have strong views about this. It does strike me as a potential way of saving money while improving the quality of service.
Yeah, I think it was Milan where they had that as well, out to the airport when we filmed that for our episode of Transit Unplugged TV that's on right now on YouTube. Okay, switching topics slightly, micromobility. Big thing that happened this decade so far, and a little bit the previous decade, was e-bikes, scooters, micromobility, fitting in. Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's been a rocky road for micromobility, sort of with the pandemic and afterwards. A lot of the shared scooter companies that were big 5 years ago are no more. Bird is gone. Remember Bird? They were all over. But some of the scooters are still around, and e-bikes are still around, although there's a couple of big e-bike companies that have either gone bankrupt or are really struggling, like Rad Power, one of the industry leaders. And I continue to believe that e-bikes are a really exciting technology for urban mobility that can be complementary with transit. What's concerning, though, and I'm sure you're following some of this, is there's been a pattern of fires
Yeah.
that have been blamed on e-bikes really unfairly. They're caused not by e-bikes that you would buy in a store, but by these sort of e-mopeds that are much faster with fatter tires, often bought from Alibaba or from China, and often used by deliveristas, and they're serviced sort of by somebody's uncle when the battery has a problem. And that is really dangerous. So I have empathy for transit systems that want to make sure there's not a fire on a train or a bus, God forbid. But at the same time, most e-bikes, the vast majority of them, those that are bought through reputable retailers, are perfectly safe. So this is really a federal problem where I think we need to make sure that we're keeping out really dangerous models from overseas. So that's a tricky one. And I actually don't have a great solution for a transit CEO because you're sort of caught here. You want to support the technology, but you can't allow a fire risk from something that's not an e-bike, but it looks a bit like one. So it gets complex. What is exciting, though, and I think that to the extent possible, transit leaders should be supporting this strongly, is the trend toward electric bike share. Have you noticed this?
Interesting.
In New York and San Francisco and DC, cities where bike share is popular, the utilization rates of electric bikes in their system is astronomical. You're talking like 5 times more use per bike per day. And they cost a little bit more, but they can be traveled further and they're fun. And in cities like where I live in DC, there's been more and more e-bikes introduced into the system. I think that transit should be fully supportive of this trend because it expands sort of like the walk or bike shed around a transit stop. These vehicles are very safe. They're obviously safe because they're part of the public system. They're not likely to be brought on board a transit vehicle because they're going to be parked. And to me, this is all very positive and encouraging for transit. So I am all about and very supportive of electric bike share.
Yeah. Me too, man. We did an episode of Transit Unplugged TV with Randy this last year in Washington, D.C. called How Do I Get There? And we rode every mode of transit in the city, from
Nice.
the water taxi to train, and showed you how to use that to get to the monuments, the museums, and all the things that are there. And we definitely included the share bike program. And I try to ride them, to be honest with you, if it's decent weather in every city I go to, a new city. The scooters and the bikes are great kind of self-guided tours, to be honest with you. You can get around and see it all. I love it.
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I actually just wrote a story funny 3 weeks about this just before Thanksgiving in Bloomberg that unfortunately can be quite expensive to use bike share when you're not a member or you're visiting a city
Yeah,
like
you're
New
right.
York.
Yeah,
It's like a 10-minute ride can cost like $10 in New
yeah,
York, which
yeah.
is absurd. And I do think that's something that should change. But to the extent possible, yeah, I mean, if you electric bikes are just such a wonderful way to travel, and I do it all the time myself in Washington.
That's great. All right, let's shift since you're in Washington and we keep talking about it. Let's talk about what's happening in Washington. So, as we end up this year of 2025, there is yet to be on the floor of the House the Reauthorization Act, which, that was the game plan. And then, of course, the shutdown stalled everything. The House and the Senate are both working on it now, I understand. Sam Graves' committee, the House T&I committee, wants to have something on the floor, hopefully in the first quarter. And then you've got the budget situation where we got an extension, but that ends in a month or so. Do you have any thoughts on what predictions or what you think is going to happen with either or?
My prediction is it's going to be a mess.
I have a lobbyist friend that always starts every call with that.
Is that right? No, I mean, I think that this past year of 2025 has made me very wary of trying to predict anything of what's going to happen from the guy who occupies the White House or what's in Congress at the moment. And that's, I think, particularly true now, Paul, because the relative sway that Johnson has in the House and even the sway that Trump has over Republicans writ large seems to be declining. So it could get really messy. I know a lot of people I trust who think that surface transportation reauthorization never happens on time,
Mm.
and it's likely to be not done by this Congress, but the next one. But I've also heard people say that the current Republican Congress is well aware that they will probably lose their majority in the House, if not the Senate. So they really want to do it now while they have control. Do I know what's going to happen? No. Am I going to lie to you? No. So I'll just tell you, I don't know, Paul.
But at least we had a chance to talk about it.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. A couple more hot topics before we wrap it up. These are, I think, important. You've talked to this some safety, speed, and the streets. Street design changes, bus lanes, slow streets, congestion pricing pilots. They all accelerated this last year. What have we learned this year, in your mind, about the politics of taking space away from cars, and how will that change in 2026?
Well, I actually haven't said this yet. To me, the biggest transportation win of the year has to be New York City congestion pricing. Don't you think?
It's the
Like it is
biggest.
such, yeah, it's a watershed moment for this country. We finally have shown that it can actually work here, not just in London and Milan and Stockholm and Singapore and pretty much almost every other city that's done it. And, what's interesting, I mean, we could talk about all the upsides in Manhattan where there's faster car traffic, faster transit service, fewer crashes, less pollution, less noise. It's a long list of benefits. But what I find particularly striking is that, and this isn't surprising for those who follow congestion pricing, is that the popularity of congestion pricing is rising sharply among New Yorkers. Now that they can see the impacts, it has become a much more popular policy. But to me, this is a huge question that I have in 2026 and maybe also 2027, is whether some of the other cities that have been sort of exploring congestion pricing and contemplating it, like Boston and Seattle, Chicago, some of them might actually start to say, let's actually think about really doing this. Perhaps as a way of buttressing their own transit systems, which frankly all need money. So I think that we've learned this year that congestion pricing can work in America and that Americans can like it as they experience it. So I'm optimistic that it has a promising future here.
All right, so let's switch to something that maybe isn't working as good as promised, and that is EV buses. So I was just in Montreal last month and went to see a bus manufacturer, and Nova Bus, and they had pulled out of Plattsburgh, New York, and
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
made an announcement last year that they were going to go all electric. Well, they reversed course, and I talked to the president of the company while I was there. It's on camera, and he says, we just announced at the CUNY conference we're going to start building diesel buses and hybrid buses again. A lot of CEOs have told me in the last year, Paul, it's just not working for all of our routes. For some routes, yeah, it makes sense. But just as a general solution, they're really heavy, they're really expensive, they take a lot longer, and we have to charge them up so many times. It doesn't make sense. What are your thoughts on all that? How did 2025 clarify the realistic pace of electrifying bus fleets, and where are we at on that going into 2026 on your kind of global take?
I think that it has been overblown as a priority to reduce emissions from transportation. We all want to see emissions fall from transportation, but the operational challenges of going from a diesel powered bus to an electric bus are very obviously real. You can see that now. We have years of data showing it. And the cost, it's about double the expense to get an
Yeah,
electric bus versus a
yeah.
diesel bus. And the diesel buses, like, yeah, they may look low, they get low MPG. They're like, you can see the smoke coming out of their back end. So people think, oh, that's so polluting. No, what's actually polluting are all the cars. So if you have a marginal dollar, I would much rather see that be invested in improving transit service with whatever vehicles are provided rather than go toward swapping out existing buses for electric ones. I just think this is an area where American priorities are out of whack. It shouldn't be on transit agencies to change their fleets to reduce emissions and address climate change, because transit agencies every day are by
Thank you.
nature reducing emissions because they are taking cars off the road. So we should liberate transit agencies, in my view, to focus myopically on that goal. Like, how do you get the maximum number of riders and reduce car trips to the maximum extent possible? Don't obfuscate with EV stuff, is my attitude.
It sounds like a theme I'm hearing from you, David, is mission creep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This is something I believe really strongly. And in a weird way, those on the left are as guilty of it as those on the right. But well-intentioned people on the left who say, like, oh, we have to convert all of our buses to electric, are creating problems too for transit agencies. And I don't think it's a wise move.
It's interesting. It's good. Thank you for that feedback. I love having all your ideas. A couple more questions before we wrap up. Mobility as a service, fare integration, MaaS as we call it. Is MaaS finally maturing, or did 2025 show us its limits? What forms of integration, fare, schedules, apps matter most in 2026?
Remember, yeah, mobility. What was mobility as a service's heyday, Paul?
Yeah.
Like 2018 was when you couldn't escape it or something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure 2025 was the year we concluded it overblown. It might have been a little bit before this year.
Yeah.
It's what's funny is I look at academic studies and you still see all these articles about MaaS models. And I joke to a friend, I think there's more people studying mobility as a service than there are people actually using any mobility as a service
Yeah.
platform.
We talked about that in my class at Villanova. That's interesting. These engineering
Yeah.
students.
So, and I just think the whole field was massively overhyped a few years ago. My take on it is that at the end of the day, people want fast, frequent, reliable transit service. They want safe ways to travel by bike or scooter. And if you don't provide that, simply knitting together a bunch of junky options like really slow, infrequent transit and extremely dangerous bike share is not anything that's going to make it more likely they don't drive. It's just not helpful. So if you are in a city, and unfortunately this is the case in most of the US, where transit service is not that frequent and biking is not that safe, focus there on solving those problems before you start talking about a MaaS app, because it's not going to do anything.
All right, last one. Let's put on our futurist look ahead. If you had to name, and you may have already done it, but if you had to name one sleeper trend in transit that people are overlooking but will be big in 2026, what would it be and why?
It's funny. I'm about to discuss this very question. I'm sort of more looking at urban transportation writ large at the podcast that Wes Marshall and I do called Look Both Ways. which people are happy to listen to if they want more of my takes that aren't just about transit. But in terms of like what I think could be exciting in 2026, I would actually come back to something I mentioned earlier, which is this idea of autonomous trains.
Mm.
I think this idea is just starting to penetrate the imaginations of activists and transit leaders. The Overton window is just now expanding to include the idea of trains and rail that doesn't have operators within it. And the potential opportunities to provide higher frequency, more reliable, and lower cost service are very intriguing. And I think it'll be very hard to explore them in some places that have very strong unions that are threatened by the idea. But I do feel like the genie is coming out of the bottle on this a bit. And I expect we're going to hear more conversations now that Honolulu is doing it and Washington, D.C. is interested. And I personally think that's exciting. I think it's something that we should be discussing. We want to make sure that transit remains safe, of course. But if there's a way of providing better service at a lower cost, we should all, I think, want to think hard about it.
That's great. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share? And then at the end, I'd like you to tell people how they can hear more from you. And, you mentioned the podcast, but you give more details. But are there any other general thoughts on transit or going into 2026 that you haven't shared already that you'd like to get out there?
I would just reiterate that the sort of the point from when we first began, because I think it's a little conceptual, but it's so important that, transit in America is threatened now. It really is. And I think it's incumbent on all of us who care about its future to ensure that we empower or do everything we can to empower the men and women who are working so hard within agencies to be able to provide the most useful, highest value service that they can. And a way of doing that is helping to secure money from states and the federal government when possible and from regional governments, but also bat away people on the left or the right who try to saddle transit with responsibilities that no transit agency can really ever address, whether it's solving crime or solving climate change. Neither one is something that it's appropriate to expect your local transit agency to fix. So let's not go there.
Yeah, I used to, when I was CEO in Baltimore, they asked me to kind of say, what are your new priorities? This was 8-10 years ago. And I don't think they've changed for me. I started in this business 38 years ago until today. And that is safe, efficient, reliable transit with world-class customer service. They're the four cornerstones, I think, of a great transit system: safety, efficiency, reliability, and world-class customer service. If you build it, I think they will come. The cities that are doing that are seeing good things. All right. So, David, I've really enjoyed, as I always do, you're a fascinating person to talk to. Where can people hear more from you and read more of you and all that as we go?
I appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun. I have all of my articles collected along with a free newsletter I published called Paved with Good Intentions about transportation. It's on my website, davidzipper.com. And a fun thing that I did this year, which I've really enjoyed, is, like I mentioned, launching that podcast with Wes Marshall, the author of a book called Killed by a Traffic Engineer, a podcast called Look Both Ways with David and Wes, where every 2 weeks we discuss sort of transportation news and discuss it kind of in a way like almost like a sports radio talk show. We're just sort of going back and forth and bantering.
Oh, I like that.
It's been a lot of fun, and we've gotten some great feedback from the transit community on it. We talk about transit all the time. So if folks are curious, just check out Look Both Ways with David and Wes. You'll find it right away. We've recorded about a dozen episodes now, and we're looking forward to doing more in the new year.
How long are your shows?
About 45 minutes.
Okay,
and
yeah.
You'll appreciate this, Paul. Each one of them, we record it with a live stream on YouTube Live at around 6 p.m. Eastern, so happy hour time. So each episode we end with a segment we call Rail Drinks, and we give a toast. And we have a new beverage every week or every episode. So yeah, it's been we try to have some fun with it,
I love that. Along that lines, when I was up with Ben Limmer in Connecticut at CT Transit a couple months ago, it's not alcohol, but it's they had for sale colas that were made. They have a QR code on it, but colas that were made for the train. And said, it was like CT Transit cola, and the QR code, when you went and clicked on it, it took you to a Spotify list of songs related to riding the bus and riding the train. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool. I'm just hoping that cola doesn't have, like, I don't know, a slight hint of diesel or something.
Yeah. I actually don't think they sell it on there. It's just like commemorative or anything. But David, this has been a great conversation. What a great way to look into 2026 and have a look back at 25. We've talked about all the hot topics. You've been controversial like I knew you would, and it keeps it exciting. So thanks for joining us. I can't wait to listen to your podcast sometime in the near future. And I encourage our listeners, if you enjoyed this, check out his podcast, Look Both Ways, wherever you get podcasts. Thanks, David.
Happy New Year. Good to see you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transit Unplugged, the world's #1 transit executive podcast. I'm Julie Gates, executive producer of the podcast. Many thanks to the team that makes this show happen. Host and producer Paul Comfort, producer Chris O'Keefe, editor Patrick Emile, associate producer Cindy Raskin, and consultants Dan Meisner and Jonas Woost at Bumper. Transit Unplugged is being brought to you by Modaxo, passionate about moving the world's people. If you would enjoy behind-the-scenes insights and updates from the show, sign up for our weekly newsletter, which has links to can't-miss conversations with the biggest names in mobility. Head to transitunplugged.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Transit Unplugged.